Dylan, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yeah, no problem. I'm glad to be here. My name is Dylan. I'm a market socialist, and I have a very small YouTube channel, which I infrequently post to. But yeah, that's the gist of it, I guess. I also make music. You can find me on Spotify under Dylan Blay. And yeah, it's good for me.
Cool. So why market socialism? Like, my position is that I think having like a mixed economy that uses both a socialist aspect where the government provides lots of funds to things, but doesn't actually take the means of production and give it to the populace, um, combined with the capitalist economy, is a far better system because they both function to do different jobs better than the other one. And so it's kind of like having Shaq and Kobe in your team. You want to have both, and one is not as good as both. So why would you want to have both? Also, your door just opened for some reason.
Oh, that's fine, I guess. The door doesn't really bother me much. I'll get up and close that in a minute. But so
Invisible, like axe murderer coming up behind you.
great. Now you gave me something else to worry about. I will say, so for like the market socialism thing, the more or less like a dichotomy shift that I'm trying to that I want to happen here. So between like if you're looking at like a mixed economy, right? Obviously, there still needs to be some room for like private investment. What I'm looking for is like overall a transition into the state of the current economy into something closer resembling market socialism. I don't think there's going to be 100% mandated worker co-ops. I think that's a bit ridiculous to expect. But what I'm looking for is like a larger portion of like certain sectors to be specifically governed by the cooperative sphere to make it seem more like, or make key industries more democratized in that sense, right? There's not just worker co-ops that are like the exclusive model, right? Like, I'm not sure if you've heard any of the arguments for consumer co-ops as well. They're very prominent, and there's a lot more data to pull from on them. And essentially, it helps with like the great, like inequality problem that a lot of people on the left are looking to resolve. And that's not exactly capitalist enterprise. You know what I'm saying?
Tell us more about that. How does it work, and why do you think it solves? What are the problems? How does it solve them?
So, I mean, first things first, with like consumer co-ops, there comes with so like I think the most prominent example that comes to mind is credit unions. Those are very prominent. At least they are here. For reference, I'm Canadian. So, um, the way that these credit unions solve problems, though, is because what they do is they do provide a share to all members by having access to a share in the business. This kind of creates like a hard asset, or sorry, a liquid asset, but something that the people who are like members of the credit union actually have access to. They also can freely manipulate this. The banking structure loses its profit incentive, but still generates profit based on like the shared interest motive of people in the community, and they still want to generate interest on mortgages. But what they'll do is they'll opt for lower rates because it's not all concentrating in one place. So like they're still treating it like a for-profit enterprise, but there's not exactly like large big boy shareholders at the top making all the money. There's a lot of benefits to this business model. And I like this credit union business model because it does meet the economies of scale kind of like question. So at least 9% of banks in Canada are credit unions, including one of the largest, which is Desjardins, which is a very notable one. I mean, you guys have that in the States, and it is a credit union.
And why would you want those as opposed to like the super capitalistic evil banks that we have here that are incredibly successful?
I mean, so there is like actual better, like pretty good feats for credit unions. The fact that they're growing consistently, and so they're pretty consistently growing still, and they are showing like 9% or about a 3% better growth rate per quarter than certain traditional banks are. There's a lot of studies on these that show that there is different kinds of economic productivity like gains. So like one of them is being able to provide like different I have this whole document about it. I'm just looking for sources. That way, if you need any sources, I can validate my claims. But yeah, so there's different studies on the fuck. I'm brain fart. Oh yeah, it was something. So they have like they exceed in certain areas, like being able to adapt to the overnight rates of like the current government, whatever current government's in power. They have better success rates in doing that to make the actual interest rates of the economy accommodate that, which is good. It's very, very nice.
Wait, isn't that what the Fed does automatically here in the States?
Yeah, but the problem is that certain traditional banks, they jack up the prices of um, or jack up the interest rates within to keep the profit margins, but credit unions have like less of an incentive to do that because they're not a for-profit enterprise. And so they continually have shown that they can't, like, they don't do that.
But do you think that having a prevalence of a system like that would cause an increase in inflation? Because any amount of like the importance of having capitalism is that it curbs inflation, and that if we get too much money and if poor people get too much money, then they're able to buy more things that are needs like milk, eggs, water, and the prices of those things go up dramatically, which is not a good thing. And so simply providing less drive for a capitalistic enterprise can cause an increase in inflation, which would be bad.
Well, I mean, this system still functions on a market, right? So it still adheres to a lot of the market principles and keeps prices low. Like, I don't think necessarily we're losing some of those benefits to having a market economy.
How so? Like if there's no more incentive for profit, doesn't that necessarily mean that the market isn't working as well because there isn't as much drive to get money out of the system, and so it maintains like in savings or whatever?
So, I mean, there's, or if we're just talking about the credit union point still, like there's still, obviously there's still incentive to generate profit and keep revenue high. Like that's what maintains the business, like for staying alive, of course, right? But the profit margins aren't looking to be exponentially great, and they aren't concentrating into the hand of individual CEOs. So what happens here is you're getting benefits for all of the members of the credit union in the sense that they're capable of like distributing these assets in a way that they want to. Obviously, with having shares comes, greater say in the business. And a lot of the times, I mean, they will delegate an individual to do community investment on their part. So like prominent strategies are like community investment. You could theoretically do some type of a dividend within the like credit union of what the profit margins are. You could allocate that to each individual member of the credit union. You could also do some type of like wealth fund within the credit union. That's another one I've seen a few times. I like that.
How is that
one.
different from like stocks?
What do you mean, like what do you mean stock?
A privatized entity which has stockholders, and the stockholders, shareholders do all of that as well. What's the difference?
So I mean, first things first, there's an easier like barrier to entry. Secondly, these people are directly like hand in hand tied in with the business, which makes it.
What's the difference? You said there's a different barrier to entry there.
I mean, obviously, I'm talking about like the financial burden of buying stocks. Like pretty pricey, difficult for people to get in. Most credit unions just opt to share in for membership, which is pretty nice.
How does that work?
Essentially, by setting up like a bank account with the credit union, what you do is you're subjecting yourself to the conditions of the credit union in exchange for a share of the business. So it's kind of like you start working with us and you get a share, but you're subject to some of our conditions as a member. That obviously comes with like our fees, which are very low, usually, things like that.
Why would having a monthly fee be better than buying a stock and having like its price rise?
The monthly fee also comes with the benefits of having like it's just a bank account. Most banks do have like a monthly fee of some kind, right? Credit unions are usually smaller enterprise. Typically, they have low fees, but they do have some, right?
Do banks have a monthly fee? I don't think so. Like most savings and
Lots of
checking
banks
accounts.
do. I don't know, like, again, I don't know about where you are. There's a few big ones that have like certain types of fees here.
Like I know mine doesn't. Mine is just to just leave it there indefinitely.
Mine doesn't, but that's because I'm on online banking, like exclusively online. But
So do you think that the growth rate that you were talking about of showing that these do have growth would continue if they got to the same level as regular banks? Because it seems like obviously any new system that's introduced and supported would have a higher growth rate because it's a smaller business, and smaller businesses can typically grow faster when starting off. Well, why think a banking system that was prevalent with these would do better than one that's like the one we have in America?
so, I mean, these already are meeting the requirements for what I'd say is like an economy of scale. Like they do make up roughly 9% of like the actual finance sector itself for, banking institutions. Like that's a pretty goddamn high amount. And they have been a consistent force in the market. It's not like we're seeing an uptick of like a specific uptick in introduction of like these types of credit unions. I mean, I don't know if this is like super important to the argument though, like the credit unions thing. Like I prefer the banking system. It's an alternative. It's just an example of a type of consumer cooperative.
Okay. So why think that consumer cooperatives in general would be better than the capitalist systems?
Well, again, like if I'm pulling on like the actual statistics that come with these, so like 90, I like the idea, right? Like everyone traditionally advocates for the goddamn worker co-op thing. I think the data on those are a little sparse. I mean, there's like some relevant data for it, but these co-ops make up a large enough percentage, and they've shown to like in several areas do a better job at curbing wealth inequality itself than at least the type of like faux capitalism we see ourselves in now.
And why is that a good thing? Why would stopping wealth inequality necessarily build a better economic system?
Well, when you couple that with like relativistic benefits to the actual traditional structures of business we see, it can be a good thing for, keeping the barriers of like obviously the CEO wage gap and the salary gap between higher ranking employees and lower ranking employees gives them more like economic mobility. I think that's a pretty good thing that incentivizes, more like market movement throughout the economy. It's not a
I'm
bad
not
thing either.
following that part of the argument. So how does having less inequality of a pay gap increase any kind of market mobility stuff? Like I don't see how that relates.
Well, I mean, logically, when people have access to, money, they're able to use the money, which means they're able to move it throughout the economy. Money, in order for like a monetary system to work, the money's got to move.
Yep.
Right. Having more people input into the market is probably a better thing. Keeps competition a real thing.
Well, that's where I brought up the inflation thing. So if everybody has more money, then things start to cost more. And so simply not having as much of a gap between the wealthy and the poor doesn't necessarily mean a good outcome, because you can have too much money in the case of the poor, which then causes mass inflation and less people get food. So I don't think the
This doesn't
fact that
really
there is a
cause
wage
mass
gap.
inflation because this has like nothing to do with like printing more money.
Well, printing money doesn't matter. What matters is who has the money. If poor people have more money, that's what causes inflation. It doesn't matter if you print more money or not.
So if you're saying that for whatever reason, if the Fed kept similar degree or like a similar like minted similar amounts of money or allowed certain amount of credit, and we were to keep that trend up, but the distribution of that income was different, that would cause inflation.
Yes, and inflation of many things and deflation of other things. So, like, take rich people. Rich people, the price of yachts is going up because there's more rich people trying to buy yachts, and so the yacht prices have inflated because there are more super rich people. But during the pandemic, when people started to put money into savings and stopped spending as much on things, the prices of eggs and milk and regular products are now going up, not because the government's printing more money, but because more people have more money in the bank account to buy this kind of stuff. And so simply, if the distribution of wealth leans more towards people who are buy food every day, then the price of food is going to go up regardless of if you print more money.
See, the way I recall it is people did not gain more money during the pandemic. Like an average person did not become more wealthy throughout the pandemic. There would seem to
Oh,
be
no.
more
So
food insecurity
just to
issues and
clarify,
things like that.
they were saving it. So during the pandemic, when the pandemic started, people spent less money. They were saving it. And so over the course of those years, people's savings accounts grew. And then when the pandemic kind of like ended, let's call it, people started to spend that money, more market confidence. And when people started to spend that money, the prices of all these products started to go up. That's why we're seeing the prices of eggs and milk continue to rise, independent of printing money. It has nothing to do with printing money. It has to do with the fact that there is so much money in the savings account. And now they're starting to spend that money and things are starting to go up, which is why the Fed is increasing the rates, mortgage rates, because there's such a amount of money in people's savings that they aren't motivating the economy as much as they normally did, and which is what's causing the inflation of food.
See, I don't know. I would like to I would need to know if there's some kind of like actual like what the actual contribution to that to the like the degree of inflation we're seeing is, because from my understanding the inflation is coming from like a variety of different factors, especially it is or in the increase in prices especially is coming from like, so we're seeing that a lot from like supply shortages and things like that too, right? And companies have to they've had to put more in since the pandemic. They've had to put more money into making their products, especially with like small business shutdowns too. We're seeing corporate profits go up because they are charging higher prices because there's less competition in the market now due to the fact that all these small businesses are closing down.
Well, that would only be the case if it was like that everywhere, but it's not in that case. Like the prices of all of these foods are going up in every country where people are buying more of them, on all the rich countries disproportionately to the poor countries, uh, because the people supplying them or people buying them are buying more of them because they can.
But
And
my
like,
market principle still applies here because there's less like global competition overall. So even with like agriculture, right? Agriculture is a global industry
well, I'm
because
talking
there's
about things
less
like eggs and milk,
participants.
which can't be like don't have a global impact because they'd spoil if they go global, or it takes too much money to like ship them overseas, and so it wouldn't really make a difference here. So if we're talking about the little things, milk and water and cheese and stuff, those are mostly going to be determined by like the arable land nearby you, which is mostly where people make it and ship it to because it's just cheaper. And so the global impacts of that wouldn't really matter if there's like countries overseas don't do it anymore. That wouldn't make a difference.
Well, this could even still apply from like a domestic standpoint, right? Because there's obviously like different industrial farms and factory farms which had the competition, and smaller local farms. Local farmers have had to sell their properties off during the pandemic, right? So one of the big like issues with the pandemic is you'll see farmers take their large swaths of land, 75, 80 acres of land, and they'll sell off half their property, right? Which means they're not capable of putting, you know, as much time or space into it in order to meet their mortgage or bill payments, because what they're doing is they're selling off swaths of property, but they're not able to produce as much like in terms of actual product. And I
Yeah, but
think
that
this
would
is like
cause
the
a
main
pay
driving force.
raise. Well, that would cause an increase like during the pandemic. That wouldn't explain the massive increase in inflation after the pandemic.
Well, that might also result in those savings that you're talking about, but I like during the pandemic. So it didn't really go away after the pandemic because I think we're still feeling the consequences of
Oh,
that.
right, right. So I would agree, but that would mean like there should be like a bell curve kind of a thing. And it shouldn't just be like a sharp uptick. And so the fact that there's a sharp uptick in prices of things like eggs and milk wouldn't be explained by the fact that some small farmers sold off their stuff during the pandemic, because that would, in if your theory was correct, you'd expect a patterned uptick during the pandemic as opposed to just a massive uptick at the end, which means it seems to be the case that the massive uptick at the end has something to do with more people buying it, which means there's higher demand, less of it available. Because I don't think the like amount, I think actually the amount of like eggs and stuff has gone up, but the prices has also gone up because there's less of them because more people are buying them.
I mean, to that extent, like I don't know if that really necessarily like I don't know. I haven't seen like myself have not seen a goddamn like people hoarding eggs or anything like that. Like that's like it's like a weird thing to discuss because like I'm not sure what the actual observational like information, the relevant information to this is, other than like we're kind of just applying theories here.
Well, this isn't my theory. This is something that when the Fed and experts in the field talk about inflation of these products, that's what they're talking about. Is more people are buying them. There's less available, even if more are made, which is why these things are going up in price because they are uh, more demand for them. It's not like there's a supply chain issue with chickens right now. There's lots of chickens, but because more people had more money and saved it, now people who didn't used to buy eggs or the nice eggs are now buying the nice eggs, and so there's less of them because they have more savings.
I mean, like that just comes down to the actual, I guess, market forces itself for like what's in stock at the stores themselves.
Yeah,
So
that's
there's,
that's specifically only what I'm talking about. When I'm talking about inflation of these products, it's because of the stores are running out of them. There's more demand for them, and
well,
so
I
they've
mean, there's
bumped
more
up the
demand for them,
prices.
but that's like also because of some of what I just applied, right? Like the, I mean, so with the corporate profits thing point that I just brought up, like there's also less, so there's less input from smaller movers in the market. Um, I mean, I don't know if you saw, for example, but like on Amazon, the cost of diapers skyrocketed because they were able to charge such little cost comparably to any smaller business, which are, you know, trying to sell at a similar price margin. And then now the prices have gone back up. They've skyrocketed at Amazon because they were able to outlast their competition in the market, right?
Right.
And I feel like
Diapers
that
are.
principle. Well, I feel like that principle also applies with small farms comparatively to industrial farms. Industrial farms are able to charge a lower rate. So you might have seen eggs, despite the cost being higher, right, during the pandemic to produce, you're still looking at similar comparable prices. And now that these smaller farmers are like losing their ability to produce and don't have their resources because they weren't making any money during the pandemic, they weren't able to supply grocery stores as much because of what these other businesses are doing, and these larger farms are capable of outproducing them.
I don't really see that as an issue. Like for like Target eggs are some of the biggest suppliers. The small ones don't really have a competitive impact on that because they just make up so small of the market anyway. I don't see that as a real issue. But so I'm on the whitehouse.gov. It says this surge in demand may be in part fueled by savings many households accumulated during the pandemic, as well as relief payments from fiscal responses last year and this year. So this is a pretty wide held theory here, not just like a fringe or anything.
And that's on the like the White House.
Yeah, whitehouse.gov. Looking at by Jared Bernstein and Ernie Tedeschi.
You just want to screen share that real quick?
Okay. Move that over there. Let's go back to Control F. Savings. Screen share. Share. Is that pent up savings? Is that the right one? The surge in demand may in part be fueled by savings many households accumulated during the pandemic, as well as relief payments. Blah blah blah.
Okay. You want to just like go down for a second? My face is kind of covering some of that paragraph.
There's the higher quality versions, the eggs thing I mentioned.
again, not an expert on farming, so I wouldn't know about egg grade, but I see what you're trying to imply here. Although the type of like what they're talking about having access to restaurants, again, I think that like necessarily is a different thing because, you know, with the whole like restaurant and service economy, there is a component of going and eating in. And there is something that was like completely missing during the pandemic, whereas eggs have still been constantly available. I mean, maybe you had Uber Eats, but a lot of these smaller restaurants, that sort of market principle would still apply to some of these smaller restaurants that they're referencing here.
Sure.
So I mean, yeah, like I see some of that too. I see what you're saying. It's certainly referenced here. I guess the Fed agrees with it, but like I would need to look at like actual numbers. I want to see something that shows the impact because I still think the market principle applies. And another
How
thing,
would we test that? How would we test like which one is the predominant cause? Or like, obviously we wouldn't be able to test it, but like where could we like find information that would convince you one way or the other?
I mean, surely there like maybe if there's some scholarly articles on things like how pent up savings during, you know, for the middle class, at least during a period of recession, if they're capable of storing money.
Oh,
How that impacts
did you
prices.
find the Federal Reserve one? It's the next link on Google. Federalreserve.gov says excess savings during the COVID pandemic. Did you see that one? Because you mentioned the Fed agrees with it.
Well, I saw that. Yeah, pretty much, right?
Yeah.
Like I just want to see what the actual fiscal impacts of this are, right? Like it's, and I don't. So there's still. I mean, I guess we're talking about market principles, which I feel like is only tangentially related to the topic itself. I mean,
well, no, because the topic, my question is if we applied something like your system to get rid of wealth inequality, wouldn't that have a similar effect as what the pandemic is doing? Because more poor people would have more savings, which would then cause a proportional rate of inflation for products like eggs and things, as what we're seeing now, meaning that implementing your system would have the risk of causing the same kind of inflation that we're seeing, or more, probably more. And that's the argument. That's why it's related.
okay, yeah, sorry, I guess I must have just forgot, but I don't know, like providing more lower income people with access to opportunities to have more disposable income, I feel like that might not be the sole route because a lot of these savings are probably coming in the form of like the upper middle class itself as well. So I'm not sure what the numbers are like for like specifically lower middle class, low income, and even some middle income people in terms of pent up savings, right?
Would that make a difference to the argument here? Because the argument is that
Well, I don't
more
think
poor
poor
people
people are
have.
hoarding wealth, right? Like they're not going to
Oh,
be
yeah.
penting up their savings to input it into like expensive premium eggs or anything. I
Right.
think just providing them with more disposable income gives them more mobility overall, right? And this isn't just like an immediate change thing. You're going to see this gradual rise over time. And it's probably going to accommodate similar shopping habits to the ones we're seeing now. I
Wasn't
don't
that
know
like a problem?
necessarily.
Because
I
like
don't.
if we imagine we gave all, imagine like we just took all the poor people in the planet and just gave them all $1,000 and put them in Midwest America or something, there would be no more eggs. Like they would buy all of the eggs. There would be zero eggs left. And so the price would drastically increase. And so simply providing more money to poor people in and of itself, while I think it's moral and it's a good thing, would cause the benefit of more products being bought by those poor people, obviously, meaning they're less available to everyone, which causes massive inflation, wouldn't it?
So, I mean, the thing that I see that you're saying here is like obviously an immediate input of $1,000 hypothetically into the, Midwestern poor people bank account. Suppose they were all to go out and buy groceries immediately and all buy milk immediately, right? Like maybe in that world that might be the case, but I still feel like there's obviously so much that poor people can do with having more overall disposable income that doesn't just entail groceries and doesn't just account for like individual preference. Some people like eggs, some people don't. Things like that. Similar market forces still apply. So, I mean, we're not necessarily just cranking up the wealth of these people either. And people aren't just going to start hoarding wealth. You're going to see more income that's able to be moved and disposed of by these lower income people, right? Things that they aren't already able to do, like consistently have food security, right?
Right. But so the hoarding thing was, the savings is what's happening in the pandemic, which is causing inflation, but that would be separate from in just paying them more money or getting rid of wealth inequality would be.
But I think that's part of the a crucial part of the argument of savings factor, which is what's influencing how much people are paying, right? So people have reserves of money, which means they're paying for like a premium product, which eggs are, could be considered somewhat of a premium product.
Well, I think it's more the fact that they have access to the money. So if you pay them more, I think it would have the same effect. I don't see why particularly the savings aspect matters as opposed to it being an increase in income or something, or a UBI would presumably cause the same effect. I don't see why the savings there is significant.
I mean, I think the savings aspect is pretty significant because other expenditures during the pandemic that people would have invested into, especially ones like restaurants, which is one of the ones that even your website mentioned, those have like a significant impact on the way people consume and eat goods, right? Like if you're not eating out every day, or if you're not eating out constantly because it's unviable in a pandemic, there's probably going to be more need for, grocery stores to have eggs, things like that, right? So
No, I think that'd be the same actually, because whether they're selling it to the restaurant or selling it to you, it's probably wouldn't make necessarily much of a difference there. But I don't, because my argument here is simply that giving.
Well, just before you like move on from that last little piece there, I think it's important to note that restaurants are capable of buying eggs wholesale, which means they get them for a lower cost. So these lower cost eggs, which restaurants are buying at, significantly lower cost, right? That's part of the market forces of keeping the prices of eggs low. If you have less restaurants that are capable of wholesaling eggs for cheap, then these companies are going to hop on the fact that because these restaurants are not buying so many eggs, so much product, they're going to have to increase the prices in grocery stores because a key consumer of their product isn't buying their product anymore.
Well, I don't think that wouldn't make any sense because they're making more. If people are buying eggs at the same rate, they're just buying them from the store instead of the restaurant. The companies would be making more money now because they're paying higher premiums for the eggs because they're buying it not wholesale. So it wouldn't make sense that they'd have to increase the price there.
No, because the middleman, the restaurant or a grocery store, for example, are not purchasing nearly as many eggs, so they have to raise the prices in order to keep doors open.
But people aren't going to restaurants, and so they're buying their own eggs now, and so the amount of eggs being sold is proportional, or probably more now, because people.
The amount of eggs being sold to an individual consumer might, but you're also depriving a core component of the economy from buying eggs.
Right, but
how many diners and restaurants and all these places use eggs on a day-to-day basis, especially every town's got their greasy spoon. Greasy spoon probably buys a fuck ton of eggs. Then
sure.
that significant portion of purchasing eggs isn't buying the eggs anymore, which means they have to account for the loss in someone who's a key purchaser, right?
Well, I see this as kind of like a spurious argument because if imagine there's a guy who goes to the diner that you mentioned to buy eggs, and the diner is closed, so then he just buys eggs from the store. He's going to buy more eggs from the store than he would have bought from the restaurant, and so the egg company is going to make a profit off of this because he's buying it not wholesale, so he's paying more for the eggs, and he's going to buy more of the eggs because typically restaurants use less ingredients than what you typically do in your own.
I mean, obviously when you buy a whole like a carton of eggs, you're probably getting 12 eggs instead of 2.
Yeah.
But my point comes from the fact that if you have one guy go to the grocery store and buy a carton of eggs, and stores are contingent on just that consumer buying 12 eggs, right? The restaurant itself does purchase more eggs on aggregate than an individual is capable of purchasing. This I think this factor is the component that I'm trying to make clear, right?
Oh, right. But I'm applying this to general. So if every person who went to the restaurant to buy eggs goes out and buys eggs, then the amount of eggs bought is significantly higher than the restaurant would buy. And so if all restaurants are closed, and people can no longer buy eggs, I actually think that the amount of eggs sold would probably either not change or increase because people would go be buying their own eggs. They still need food. So if we just take it to food in general, instead of going out, they're going to make their own food. And so the amount of food sold is going to be roughly proportional, if not greater, maybe, I don't know. And so I don't think it would actually affect the food companies would be making more money most likely because the products would not be being bought by restaurants; they'd be bought by the individuals from the stores. I don't think the amount of food sold would change in this instant, whether it's eggs or steak or whatever. They're still going to be sold at approximately the same rate to the same people. They're just buying it from a different place.
Well, again, with grocery stores, though, right? See, if you have grocery stores which are purchasing eggs wholesale, they're purchasing proportional rates based on how many people come into their store, set foot in their store every day. But then you deprive the restaurant aspect of the economy, right? These companies are still selling similar approximations of eggs to the stores based on demand for eggs in like individual households. So now you're losing a key purchaser of the product itself. And you're depriving the market of that one key purchaser through the pandemic, the shutdowns, things like that.
Oh, right. I agree. I think that the cost to restaurants is a very huge benefit to the economy and does lots of good things. But simply talking about, would the companies need to raise the price of eggs because restaurants weren't buying it? I'd say no. I'd say they're probably making more profit because everyone else is buying them indirectly in a less efficient means that cost them more money. And so the companies make more money off of eggs and they have no need to actually increase it to make up for the cost. They're probably making more profit.
Well, I mean, no, the thing is right, like the eggs aren't like a directly purchased thing from the company directly to the consumer. They go through the middleman of the grocery store, and the middleman of the grocery store only will buy as many eggs as they will need to accommodate the people who set foot, like the foot traffic in the grocery store every day, right? So this is still depriving, restaurants which do purchase a surplus of eggs. Like, I don't know if you've ever worked in a restaurant, but there's a lot of waste in there, but that still accommodates for the purchasing power of the restaurant itself. And that compensates the workplace.
Well, so do stores like Walmart and Target. They also buy a surplus, and many of them go bad, and they have to throw out bad eggs, and some expire.
I mean, I get that too, right? That wasn't part of the point, though. The part of the point was that the restaurants, because there's still this direct input from both parties, restaurants being a significant portion of the economy and grocery stores being a significant portion of the food economy as well, that even if there's waste, the grocery store is still capable of profiting, and so is the restaurant, off of the fact that they're able to sell eggs for a premium rate. Whether it's cooked, if you're getting scrambled eggs or whatever at a diner, right? So they're still able to accommodate their potential loss through the purchase, the purchase of the product or the meal itself, because the profit margins on a meal are going to be significantly higher than what they're paying for an individual egg itself, on top of labor and any capital investment. But these companies still don't get that accommodation for that loss of potential revenue from wholesalers buying eggs at the or wholesale restaurant purchasing eggs.
How would that address the point that the profit from the selling the eggs would go up when people bought them from the store more than from restaurants?
So the profit wouldn't increase because there's not an increased supply of eggs at individual grocery stores, because these individual grocery stores are only purchasing eggs based on the foot traffic of the grocery store itself. So I don't know if you're seeing
more foot traffic, they would buy more eggs. And so if people stopped going to restaurants and went more to buy them from the store, the price of eggs in the stores would go up because more people are buying them from the stores, and they would need to order more eggs from the supplier, and they would charge more for the eggs in the store because more people are buying them.
But I mean, the relativistic purchasing rate in which they buy the eggs, that just means the waste is going to go down, which means there's not significant investment into these egg. They're not paying directly to these farmers or these, I don't know what you'd call a big egg. They're not paying big egg as much as they need to initially, right? Because what's happening here is it looks like what's happening is these grocery stores are I worked in a grocery store during the pandemic. I didn't see an increase in purchasing of eggs as much as I just saw waste go down. And I feel like that's a large part of it, is waste is going down because what would have been wasted in the grocery store is still moving out. But the bulk purchases from the grocery store and the wholesale purchasing of eggs is still remaining the same, other than restaurants, a core component of the economy. especially a big egg economy?
I'm not seeing how that, like, obviously, if people did not continue to buy eggs, then the profit would go down for eggs. But if they did, then it would go up. If the same amount of eggs are being sold just instead of to restaurants, to stores, then the prices would not go down.
But the
So
thing
there,
is, a similar amount, like my argument here is contingent on the fact that similar amounts of eggs aren't being sold to grocery stores, because you're still depriving a huge purchaser of eggs from purchasing eggs. So similar amounts of eggs might be sold, or well, similar amount of eggs, or you're going to find more eggs in homes, I guess, due to the fact that grocery stores are selling them, but they're not wasting any, on top of the fact that they're not going to like wholesale purchasers. Like, I think a core component of having a capitalist economy is the fact that we produce a surplus, which does get wasted, right? And this still helps continue to keep prices low. So there's still going to be waste among restaurants. There's going to be waste among grocery stores. But all you're seeing now is that comparable level of what grocery stores are expecting. And obviously a lot of this is charted. It's expected. They place orders depending on what sales for a specific product looked like in the last quarter.
well, I don't think your argument follows here that grocery stores have a bunch of waste that they just buy for no reason. Like, obviously they buy a certain amount of excess product because some are going to be bad. So they want to maximize profit margin, so they buy as many as they can possibly sell in general. And so it's not like they just have an extra 25% of waste that they do nothing with. And so I think that your argument that they have this just bulk waste in the back that they're not using and now they're using it, therefore the economic impact to the supplier is unaffected, doesn't seem to follow. I don't think that's the case. I think they have they have some extras which they always buy because there's some that go bad, but that always seems proportional to the amount that is being bought by the people. And so it's not really, I don't think your argument follows that they just have this massive amount of waste that's now being used up that had no purpose before.
Well, I mean, so like, again, this is more an observational thing, but they do have that. Another thing though is I'm more so discussing the amount of waste that increased profit margins of selling an egg, plus, factoring those jobs for people who make the eggs and things like that in the restaurant. That helps keep costs low, because these restaurants are going to be buying more eggs from the big egg producers as like at a wholesale cost, which is going to keep the overall price of eggs proportional or cheaper because of how much they're paying for their egg order.
We have to probably just find data on that to see which one of us is right, but take a more general approach. Why think that, like, what is the cutoff point when you said you wanted to expand more, I think you said tipping point or something, more co-op related companies as opposed to capitalist ones? How do we have any countries that have an effective rate of this balance that you're talking about, and at what rate does it become ineffective and that we don't want? What is the metric we're using to establish what is the most efficient way to run a economy? Like, what should be capitalized, what should not? Why increase the amounts? What is your metric for establishing where we should make this balance?
So I think there's significant, like, and I'm sure this is one that you'll probably understand too, seeing as you have a Telecaster back there. There's key sectors there's like small
it's a
parts
bullet.
of the
It's a Fender bullet.
bullet, like an actual bullet itself, or like, is that the model, or is it just like a Telecaster bullet?
No, the bullet is the model. They were a specific model. It doesn't have the same frame. It's
okay. It's just a Telecaster neck.
Yeah, the bullets have the same neck as the
Yeah,
Telecasters.
Okay, yeah.
But they were their own little brand for a while.
Yeah, sorry, I just saw the Tele neck and thought it was a Tele.
Yeah.
But there's parts of like that, right, where parts of the economy that are going to be such a niche, like guitar, for example. I've got a lot of musical equipment in here with me. I think those things don't necessarily need to be cooperatized because they're like exclusively based on market interest. Lots of them are small business. You probably don't need to make most mom and pop style business cooperatized, but then you've got key components of the economy, like I just said, the finance sector or some grocery stores. key one that I've seen people move to for cooperatives is at-home healthcare, right? Like PSWs, personal support workers, going into people's homes, the ones that they typically belong to a network, right? That kind of thing, that can be cooperatized. I think that implementing these more broadly, which has been shown to work, would probably create some kind of dichotomy shift.
Well, the question is more like, how do we establish an economy that has these, which is successful as opposed to unsuccessful? Like, where do we say that we want to stop this progress and lean more towards capitalism? How do we establish what is better? Where would we implement these? When would we? Can we see any examples of countries that have implemented these in the level that you're advocating for that are successful compared to other countries?
So, I mean, I don't know if you see the flag on my back wall there, but I would reference former Yugoslavia as having success with at least a market socialist experiment. They were this, significantly increase and industrialize using this model. They were capable to output a lot of different types of goods and certain types of industry. They operated on a slightly different system than what I'd advocate for, but that's mostly just through payouts and things like that, and a little more state involvement. I still want to keep the market forces at play because some of the flaws that the economy had mostly pertain to lifting a lot of those market principles. However, there was still a lot of positive benefits from the worker cooperative model. You saw greater worker satisfaction. You saw higher productivity in individual firms. And this principle still allowed the state funding and private investment for the most like well-off firms while maintaining worker ownership, at least in large percentiles, equally distributed among workers.
We had a question from the audience from Winston's mom. How would he deal with fixed income seniors who already receive a pension and social security number? Under Yang's plan, I would lose some of my income and then be under the poverty line.
How would I deal with fixed income seniors in terms of what? Like, I mean, like I like pension and I like social security. I think it's pretty all right. Probably wouldn't change too much there. I feel like it's, I don't know. I feel like that goes without saying. Like, I'm not going to deprive old people of their income in some capacity. I don't know what's. I guess, is there like a specific part of that question that you were looking for me to address? Like maybe a part of Tom's argument or something? I don't know.
I'll wait to see if she replies in the text. But all right, so Yugoslavia. Why do you think that's a successful economy? Like what is said former Yugoslavia, right? So why do you think this was not maintained or implemented to a larger extent? Why wasn't it adopted by other countries? Why did it only work in this one very small instance?
So, I mean, it's not a very small instance yet, like 8 pretty large republics, which are all individual countries now. And I'd say the reason that it fell apart might just be good old fashioned racism, because you saw it, like, if you remember the Yugoslav wars, not a very good thing. I'd say it was also leadership problems within the state apparatus itself. So they had like a really inefficient model for governance for a while there after the leader throughout the majority of Yugoslavia's history, Josip Broz Tito, died. But what they were able to do is still implement an effective economy, which raised them from being like a very shitty backwater, 120th something poorest country in the world to top 25. You were able to see like a mass industrialization, the ability to capitalize on their oil, as well as a happy working population.
How did that compare to other countries that came out of a similar instance, like Japan post World War II? Is that something that we see in lots of different various systems? And was it significantly higher when implementing your system as opposed to those other countries coming out of those?
So there was actually one of the key republics, which would be the one with the most industrialization expended in it. I'm not sure why it got that way, but it was Slovenia. So Slovenia as a republic proportionally put up more in growth. than the rest of the republics. However, most of them were putting up pretty good rates. The only one that didn't do significantly well was Bosnia, but Slovenia actually, you saw more growth during that period of time in Slovenia from domestic investment and the Yugoslavian economy than you would see from something like Japan, which would have been affected by, like, say, American investment, external investment. You were seeing significantly less because Yugoslavia itself was like a non-aligned movement country. So they weren't getting much investment from the Warsaw Pact, Soviet Union, the Eastern Bloc, nor they were getting any really investment from the United States or like liberal countries. So the fact that Slovenia was able to put up comparably, if not slightly better growth rates than Japan with little external investment, that's pretty impressive, making it one of the top, I think, along with Taiwan, one of the fastest growing economies, if not the fastest growing economy at the time.
And how would we test this? Like implementing it, can we implement it on a local scale to see if it would work, and compare it to some other system?
I mean, I guess you could, right? Like there could probably be some kind of local system. I'm sure you've heard of Emilia Romagna, which is that region of Italy, the one that the co-op heads love to talk about, right? That's kind of a local level. Cooperatives are putting up pretty consistent rates there, not seeing too many issues. They have
what area?
like having the greater access to opportunities allowed them to thrive. They're showing comparable profit rates to traditional enterprise in other parts of Italy, things like that.
You said that you would keep some of the market forces. What market forces would you keep?
Well, I think the core principle that I've outlined here, especially with the whole big egg argument, is competition. Competition is the most important part to having a functioning market system, right? You don't really get that with one of those Soviet-style command economy, where everything's state-produced. That's kind of a shit show, right? I don't think you nor I are in favor of central planning.
And do you think there's a big risk of that? Like one of the biggest concerns with socialism and communism is that whenever they get implemented, there seems to be massive corruption in the government. Doesn't seem to be a very sustainable system for some reason. Why do you think that is?
So with the actual, like the corruption argument, I'd say when you look at the specific cases like the Soviet Union, Stalin's consolidation of power, that's probably like a key thing that comes up when you talk about this corruption, right? Because of wartime, they've kind of implemented these martial law type of measures. And I think a lot of these economies are coming out of like post-wartime, or these countries are coming out of like post-wartime martial law type of situations where they just give all the power to the leader, they give all the power to the state. And I'm not exactly advocating that. I still want to keep market forces. I don't want the state to just outright destroy them. That wouldn't be very good. That would probably lead to that consolidation of power. Even within like we still see some corruption, and I think that mostly comes like both under capitalist economies and under like socialist economies, because you're seeing, and like any level of consolidation of power is going to have some type of corruption attached to it, right? I don't want to be the absolute power corrupts absolutely guy, but there's, to an extent, there's truth in consolidating power leads to some corruption, right?
Well, it seems like in the cases of capitalistic systems, even though there is corruption, the corruption seems to be still functioning governments, functioning. We don't starve to death. Whereas a lot of the socialist ones lead to starving to death in lots of cases. So there seems to be some difference in the corruption between the two. And it could be the case that the level of power of private citizens in private run economies prevents the government from having enough power to go to that extreme, which doesn't seem to happen. They don't have the same constraints in the socialist governments, where the government does essentially take over everything because there's nothing to potentially stop them, whereas there is in a free market indirectly.
Right. So I still want to continue those like market principles, right? The competition aspects, the obviously letting consumers purchase what they want aspect. I think that's very important. That does put power back into the hands of the individual in some capacity. So I'm not just trying to I don't know, like I don't think I've advocated once for like some kind of totality, right?
Yeah. I'm thinking like an implementation problem. Why is it the case that those kinds of systems are only implemented when the government has power. It's probably because people, given the option to start a company, would prefer to start a capitalist company where they make lots of money. And so, in order to encourage more people to start the kinds of companies that you're advocating for in a greater extent, would probably require some kind of control over the government or influence from the government to do these kinds of things, which would then potentially lead to what we see in those other countries. Whereas simply people choosing are probably going to go capitalism because they like money.
So I think there's like the government can have an influential factor in terms of some initial investment, but what they don't, I mean, all states obviously have, the monopoly on power or whatever. But what I really wouldn't want to see from them is like a direct involvement in the economy, which comes in the form of like absolute centralized planning. That's the problem, I think. I think that's where the absolute corruption comes from, because when you allow the state to determine what consumers need, that's when we start, not having food. I don't know. You can't just give a couple of autocrats a bunch of money to invest wherever they see fit if they're not on the ground, if they don't have any say with their, ability to be a consumer. Right.
Gotcha. Kazakh asks, where's the scientific evidence?
T-Jump demands scientific evidence. I've got studies. I can probably send you some of them after if you'd like. I have
Sure.
like a folder of stuff.
Good to make available for people.
Yeah. If there's any specific information, just ask and I will share away.
Winston's
Knowledge is
mom.
power, people.
Winston's mom asks, does he consider it corrupt the Lewis Powell memo to place corporate interests on the higher courts, the Supreme Court, the Heritage Foundation?
Yeah. I'd say it's pretty corrupt to have corporate interests, judges and things like that. I'm in a law program. Wouldn't want that. Those kind of things are pretty bad,
Mr. Cranian asks, where's your proof that anyone is a rational actor in the economy?
So I think with anyone who's advocating a market system, they have to presuppose to an extent that someone is able to act rationally, or at least minimum in their self-interest, which would propose some type of rationality. And that in and of itself is some type of rationality to at least, determine everyone's not crazy because they're able to provide for themselves and things like that. Like that's like the presupposition of all market systems.
So rational in this context just means the ability to survive to some extent, buy food,
Yeah,
buy land.
rational. Act in your own self-interest at least. And even the craziest of brains don't, want to starve.
I disagree, but okay. There's many that do starve for no
there's
reason.
many that there are many that do, but I don't think like that's like a significantly proportional percent of the population in the way that'll impact the market like rationality thing, right? There's crazy people.
Yep.
Like I'm sure like musicians out there probably know Syd Barrett. Guy didn't eat anything but like mac and cheese for 30, 40 years, but still I don't think we're looking at a world full of Syd Barretts.
Is it Hugh Hefner, the Pepsi and M&Ms or Skittles or whatever?
Yeah, exactly. Although I will not lie, I have eaten way too many peanut M&Ms in the last couple months.
Yep. All right. Well, we have been going for about an hour. It was a great conversation. Really appreciate you coming on. Do you want to give any links or references where people can find out more about your work?
Yeah. I mean, I'll drop a link in the private chat. It's just for my own personal Spotify page. I do less political stuff now, so I feel like I came a little unprepared. Just, the facts of life kind of caught up with me. But I'll drop a link to my Spotify. I focus on mostly my music stuff now, and I do write some academic style essays, things like that. If you're interested in any of that stuff, I will share a link to at least the Spotify, which is literally just my way of shamelessly plugging. Just gonna crack it open. I also am on Apple Music, by the way. If you just search the name Dylan Blay, come up there, come up anywhere. I don't know how great some of my older songs are, but I think I've got some good stuff coming out recently. I am quite proud of it.
Not on YouTube?
I am on YouTube as well, actually. Spotify's monetized though.
You're not on YouTube, not monetized. What's the difference?
So it's you do make stream revenue from Spotify itself, whereas you don't really make anything past a certain threshold on YouTube. And let's just say my music has definitely not hit the threshold for making some money on YouTube. I'll tell you that much. Whereas Spotify does pay with every stream.
Did you put the link in the private chat?
No, I'm just about to right now. Private chat. I'm just like, there it is. Perfect. I was gonna say like I'm just haven't been on a streaming like studio thing in a long time, a few months at least. All right, yeah.
Cool. Posted. Thanks again. It was a great conversation, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. Take care.